but things like, how should we think about when a flood happens and people coming over and selling bottles of water for $500? Well, any person that sees that and goes, "Oh, that's just immoral." But coming from your perspective, that's a great thing, because then someone else will see that and go, "Oh, I can sell my bottled water for $400," and someone else can come in and say, "Oh, I'll undercut them," and so you get a bigger supply into those areas, and so the price will drop as a result of people competing with each other. And I think that's just one of the really awesome things to see is how much your worldview of economics informs it, because things like with Keynesian economics, it seems like, well, here's 1,000 variables, and I have to either skew my models so that I can deal with those, or I can skew it to say, well, these ones aren't as important. And I just like the fact that you take a kind of a different approach that explains what we see through these kind of axiomatic argumentation that Austrian economics are known for.
Well, yeah, and you're right. And I didn't explicitly mention that, and I probably should have. That, yeah, when you're saying like what's the defining attributes of the Austrian school. So yeah, one of the early battles that Karl Menger had with his counterparts in the German historical school. So it's true that Austrians tend to be free market in terms of their policy prescriptions, but it's not built in. Right. In other words, it's not that they just say at the outset, "Oh yeah, we hate the government" or something like that. Like it does flow. And it's also true in practice that the German historical school, a lot of them were, I would say, apologists, for the Prussian Empire. And so, so Menger, with his critiques of some certain, government intervention policies, that was a problem. And so one of the ways that the, German historical school would try to get around that is to say, well, no, you can't. It's not like there's laws of economics. Everything in matter. It's a case by case basis. So here I'm obviously paraphrasing, and they spoke in German. And so, whereas Menger was saying, no, there's laws of economics, right? In other words, like a physicist, it's not like, oh, there's one type of physics that applied back in ancient Rome, but then a different physics applied, in modern day democracies. You know what I mean? Like that would be silly talk. And so likewise, Menger thought, no, I'm developing laws of economics. Okay. And whereas the German historical school would have thought more, well, no, what may have worked back in ancient Rome with their system is one thing, and then now what works for us is a different thing. You see what I'm saying? They were trying to deny that there was such a thing as the laws of economics. And so that is one element. And then also, yeah, Mises, and this is one of his more controversial stances, and even not all modern day Austrians, die on this hill, but Mises himself, and certainly like Murray Rothbard and people who are in that tradition of the Austrian school, thought that basic economics was a priori, meaning, yeah, you start fundamentally with the action axiom. If you're going to decide to interpret the behavior you see out in the world as the result of conscious choice, because ultimately you don't know. You can't literally be inside someone else's mind and know that they feel things the way you subjectively know you feel stuff. You just kind of think that makes sense. That's like a hypothesis, if you will. But once you commit to that, then Mises thought all the standard results of economics, he even called them theorems, so that kind of shows he didn't think it was open to empirical verification, flow from that. And, and people derided him as being unscientific and anti-empirical, but likewise, the analogy I use with geometry, that if you're going to learn geometry is certainly very important. You can't go build a bridge if you don't know anything about geometry. And yet, if you said, oh, here's the Pythagorean theorem, and you teach it to someone, and they say, well, how do we know that's true? Should we go test 1,000 right triangles and make sure it's true? Right. You would say, no, you've missed the point. You don't understand what a proof is. We have these axioms and these rules of transformation. And if you give me the axioms, then I can deduce, the Pythagorean theorem. It's a theorem. I proved it. And you wouldn't go test it. And that's certainly not unscientific to do that. So that's what Mises thought basic economics was. And so, yeah, I guess you're saying it has a certain overlap with a type of apologetics.
Yeah.
Can I go back and just say something I meant to say about like if there's a natural disaster and like bottled water and that thing? Because this actually illustrates well what I was trying to say earlier about is a Christian and like why should a Christian know economics? So so that's a good example. So again, let's say the situation is there's a flood or a hurricane or something, and the roads are all closed, and so right now, the local storekeeper, he's only got a few cases of bottled water on the shelves, and he knows he could, quote, get away with charging $20 a case, or charging $4 a bottle or something like that, something that would normally just cost 10 cents or whatever. And so most people are okay, most Americans at least, are okay with the government just flat out prohibiting that. And so setting up a hotline and say, if you catch anybody trying to price gouge in the wake of this natural disaster, taking advantage of the poor plight of our fellow citizens, you call this hotline and the attorney general will get on that. And so I would argue that, well, no, as a Christian, you shouldn't be in favor of that, because it's, using the threat of violence to get people to do your will. And, someone charging a lot for water, it's not obvious why that should be a criminal offense, right? To me, that's unchristian. You're basically stealing from the person. You're saying, no, you have to sell it under these terms. And if you're not willing to sell it under these terms, then we're going to throw you in a cage, or that we're going to take more of your money out of your bank account through the state. To me, that's violating one or two of the 10 commandments. So that can't be a Christian thing to do. And so I think, the obvious objection would be, well, that can't be right, or, because it can't be true, Murphy, that the Christian response is to let storekeepers charge whatever the market will bear, because, that's the consequences are too horrible. And so here's where, the Bible wouldn't necessarily tell you how to think that through. I think the Bible tells you what the moral position is, but you would need the study of economics to know that, this is stuff, of course, you were alluding to, Patrick. No, actually having a really high price for bottled water is exactly what you want to have happen, because that rations the available supply. You don't want it to be the case that the first few people who get to the store after the hurricane hits clean the shelves out. Mm-hmm. Because if you had that, if bottled water is still the same price as it was before the storm, then that's going to happen. The first few people who show up, they're going to buy everything, they're going to put it in their pantry, and then everybody else is going to go thirsty. So that's not good. So instead, if you have a high price, then they say, we really probably just need to get, one case of water, and that'll hold us over until they clear the roads. And so that's a good thing. And then also, yes, with a high price, that's giving it the incentive for people around the country, to go rent big trucks and to fill them up with bottled water, and to go ship them into the region to, go get through the flood waters or what have you. Whereas otherwise, they probably wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be worth their while to organize the effort to ship a bunch of bottled water to Houston or wherever the city was that got smacked. Yeah. And so if you think it through, actually that high price serves a purpose. And then last but not least, I would say if you're a store owner and you're benefiting from a genuine windfall, meaning, it's not that you, like, let's say you knew the hurricane was coming and you thought, the price might be real high. Let me, in case that happens, just load up on water. And so you end up, bulking up your inventory way beyond what you normally would have, on the off chance that the storm hits and then prices go up. Again, you want to reward that activity, right? So it's not just a fact of nature how much bottled water is in the city when the storm hits. If people were farsighted and stocked up, you want to reward that behavior so that the next time a hurricane comes, the crisis isn't as bad. But to the extent that, you're honest with yourself, you're a convenience store owner, and the amount of water I had on hand, the bottled water, I didn't bulk up. I just happened to be sitting here. I actually got lucky in the sense, right? The hurricane hit, I didn't die. My store is still open. And instead of me charging $5 for a case, I get to charge $25. That's a pure windfall to me. Okay, you still charge it and then donate that to the Red Cross, right? And so that will ensure, then they can use the money for, needy families or whatever. So the high price still rations the available quantity so that households only take what they really need. Mm. But then if you feel guilty, and probably the Christian thing to do, so you're not benefiting from others' misfortune, is donate it to some philanthropy or give it to the church or whatever, some organization that you think is using the money responsibly. So that's what I would say. So it's, to me, that's, so again, you see how that knowledge of economics reassures you that, you really shouldn't just be able to stick a gun at somebody and say, because I think most Christians would agree, if a store owner said, no, I'm charging $25 a case, you couldn't just take out a gun and say, give me the water for the pre-crisis price or I'm going to shoot you. I think
send somebody else to do that.
Right. Most Christians, you can't do that. And so I would just argue, okay, but if you're going to have the government have an anti-price gouging law, aren't you kind of doing that through a proxy?
Yeah.
And so I think to the extent that Christians would shy away from my analysis because they, quote, no, it can't be true, or it can't be the right answer to just let them charge whatever the market, I'm trying to show, look at the good social consequence. So you're just wrong when you think the way the world works is that following, the straightforward interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount would lead to disaster. Say, no, actually it wouldn't. You think it would, but you're operating out of fear.